There are moments in a person's life that arrive without ceremony. No trumpets, no warning, no dramatic shift in the quality of the light. They simply happen, quiet as a door closing in another room, and yet they change everything. For Marcus Ellison, that moment came on a Tuesday morning in March, standing in the parking lot of a building he had once owned half of, holding a cardboard box that contained the sum total of what remained of his professional life after the divorce settlement. A stapler, 3 framed photographs, a coffee mug with a chip in the handle that Elena had always meant to throw away. He stood there in the cold, looking at the mug, and something occurred to him. Not anger, not grief, but a thought, so precise and clear it almost felt clinical. She had blocked his number. After 11 years. After the house, and the accounts, and the business shares, and the dog, and the argument about the dog, and the secondary argument about who had really loved the dog more. After all of it, she had blocked his number, as if he were a stranger. As if he were nothing. He put the mug carefully back in the box. He walked to his car. He had work to do. Before we go any further, if you are watching this for the first time, welcome. If you have been here before, you already know how this channel works. We tell stories about ordinary people in extraordinary situations, and we try to find the truth buried inside them. If this kind of story speaks to something in you, hit that like button and make sure you are subscribed, because what happens to Marcus over the next 14 months is one of the most quietly stunning reversals I have ever had the occasion to recount. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight. There is something about knowing you are all out there, in different cities, different time zones, different versions of your own complicated lives that matters to this story. Because this story, at its heart, is about what happens when the world decides it already knows who you are. Marcus Ellison was 41 years old when the divorce was finalized, a structural engineer by training and a co-founder by accident. He and a college friend named David Pace had started Ellison Pace Structural Consulting 12 years earlier out of Marcus's apartment, using a second-hand laptop and a drafting table borrowed from David's father. The company had grown steadily, not explosively, not in the way tech startups grew, but in the slow, dependable way that good engineering firms grow. Client by client, project by project, reputation built from the ground up, the same way you would build a load-bearing wall. By the time Marcus was 35, the firm had 17 employees, 3 ongoing municipal contracts, and a reputation in their city that had taken years of 18-hour days to construct. Eliana Reyes, Ellison had entered his life in year 3 of the company, when things were still precarious enough that Marcus sometimes ate dinner at his desk at 10 o'clock at night because he had forgotten lunch. She was a marketing director at an architectural firm 2 blocks away, confident and luminous and possessed of the specific kind of beauty that comes from someone who genuinely does not spend much time thinking about their beauty. They were married 14 months after their first date. For 3 years, things were good, the real kind of good, not the kind you perform for other people. Marcus worked. Elena worked. They talked about the future in the specific, optimistic way of people who believe the future will cooperate with their plans. And then, gradually, it stopped being good. Marcus, to his own measured assessment later, was not easy to be married to during those years. The company demanded everything he had. He was frequently absent in the physical sense, and almost always absent in the emotional sense, caught inside the calculations and the contracts and the weight-bearing equations that governed most of his waking hours. He acknowledged this. He did not dress it up. When he and Elena finally sat down for the conversation they had been circling for 2 years, he acknowledged that he had contributed to the distance between them. What he had not anticipated, what he genuinely had not seen coming, because some part of him had trusted in the fundamental solidity of the thing they had built together, was that Elena had been having an affair for 14 months with a man named Richard Colton, who was a senior partner at the architectural firm where she worked, who was 53 years old, who drove a car that cost more than Marcus's first annual salary. He found out not from Elena, but from a mutual friend who had assumed, incorrectly, that Marcus already knew. He sat with that information for 4 days before he said anything to Elena. He went to work. He ran his calculations. He ate his lunches. He slept on his side of the bed. And on the 5th morning, over coffee, he said, "I know about Richard." Elena set her cup down very carefully and said, "I was going to tell you." And Marcus looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her in the way you look at something you are measuring, and said, "I know." He did not ask her anything further. He called a lawyer that afternoon. The divorce proceedings took 9 months, which felt, to Marcus, like a dark and bureaucratic pregnancy that would produce nothing living. The legal dispute centered primarily on Marcus's stake in Ellis & Pace. Elena's attorneys and Richard Colton, it became clear, was funding those attorneys, argued that the company had grown substantially during the marriage, and that Elena was entitled to a significant share of Marcus's ownership percentage as a marital asset. Marcus's own attorney was competent, but outgunned. The settlement that emerged from those 9 months awarded Elena 40% of Marcus's shares in Ellis & Pace. Not enough to give her control, but enough to dilute his position, enough to shift the power balance inside the company he had built with his own hands. David Pace, his co-founder and oldest friend, expressed sympathy during the proceedings with the particular quality of sympathy that keeps its coat on, ready to leave at a moment's notice. The morning after the settlement was signed, Elena blocked Marcus's number, not his email, not his social accounts. Just the phone number, the one she had called from the hospital when her mother fell, the one she had texted from airports and restaurants and quiet Sunday mornings for 11 years. Gone, blocked, as if closing a tab she no longer needed. Marcus stood in that parking lot with his cardboard box and his chipped mug and understood, perhaps for the first time with total clarity, what the last 2 years had actually been. Not a marriage in decline, a managed exit. He had been held in place, kept stable, kept invested, kept from making any unilateral decisions about the company, while the architecture of his removal was constructed around him. He put the box in his trunk. He drove to the small apartment he had rented on a month-to-month lease. He sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop, and he began to calculate. Because Marcus Ellison was a structural engineer, and structural engineers do not respond to collapse by standing in the wreckage, lamenting the collapse. They examine the failure point. They identify what can be salvaged. They design something better. In the weeks following the divorce, Marcus took 3 actions that nobody paid any attention to at the time, because nobody was paying attention to Marcus at all. He was, as far as his social world was concerned, a man who had lost, a man diminished, quietly shuffled to the margins, while the people around him arranged themselves into new formations. Elena was seen at restaurants with Richard Colton. David Pace restructured the company's management committee in ways that had clearly been under discussion for some time. Several of the friends who had been their friends were suddenly, unambiguously, Elena's friends in a way they had never been Marcus's. He was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. And invisibility, it would turn out, is an extraordinarily useful condition. The first action Marcus took was to quietly reach out to 3 individuals he had met over the years through the firm's municipal contract work: a city infrastructure planner named Grace Kim, a civil engineering professor named Dr. Arthur Osei, and a project manager named Tom Vasquez, who had once told Marcus over lukewarm conference coffee that if Marcus ever decided to do anything independent, he should make a phone call. Marcus made the phone call. Then he made 2 more. The second action was financial. Marcus had, throughout the marriage, maintained a separate investment account that had been declared to the court and assessed at a modest valuation. What neither Elena's attorneys nor David Pace fully appreciated was what that account contained. Not cash, not stocks in the conventional sense, but a minority equity stake in a green infrastructure technology company called Viridian Systems, which Marcus had taken as partial payment from a client 5 years earlier. instead of his standard consulting fee. Because the client was cash poor, but the technology was genuinely interesting, and Marcus had done the engineering on it and believed it would work. He had valued it conservatively for the settlement disclosure at $90,000, which was accurate at the time, which was also the honest number, and which was the number Elena's attorneys had looked at and mentally dismissed as inconsequential. The third action was to file the incorporation papers for a new firm, Ellison Structural Group, using the apartment's address as the registered office and his savings as the initial operating capital. Grace Kim, Arthur Osei, and Tom Vasquez came aboard within 30 days. They took a shared office space above a dry cleaning shop on the east side of the city. They had no clients and no reputation beyond Marcus's personal one, which was currently residing in the category of man who lost everything in a messy divorce. David Pace, informed of the new firm through mutual professional channels, sent a text message, not to Marcus's blocked number, but to his work email, that said, in its entirety, "Heard about the new venture. Good luck." The period at the end of that sentence was the most dismissive punctuation mark Marcus had ever encountered in his professional life. He read it once, made a note of it, and returned to work. For the next 11 months, Marcus Ellison worked with the specific, unhurried focus of someone who has been freed from every distraction that was previously consuming him. He had no marriage to neglect. He had no social obligations to perform. He had no pretense to maintain, and no position to protect. He had a small office, 3 talented colleagues, and a set of problems he knew how to solve. He slept adequately. He ate regularly. He ran 3 mornings a week, which he had not done in years, and, on those morning runs, he thought through engineering problems with a clarity that felt almost physical, like the air was doing the work along with him. Ellison Structural Group's first contract was a seismic assessment for a mid-sized commercial building. Modest work, competently done, delivered 2 weeks ahead of schedule, and 12% under budget. The client, a property management company, was quietly impressed. They referred the firm to 2 other clients. Those clients referred others. By month 7, the firm had 8 active contracts and had hired 2 junior engineers and an office coordinator named Patricia, who was 62 years old and ran the administrative operations of the office with the quiet authority of someone who had been doing this since before some of their clients were born. And then, in month 11, something happened that had nothing to do with Marcus's careful planning and everything to do with the investment he had accepted as payment 5 years earlier from a cash-poor client who believed in his technology. Viridian Systems was acquired. The acquiring company was a European infrastructure conglomerate with interests in sustainable urban development, and they paid a figure for Viridian that the financial press described variously as substantial, surprising, and a signal moment for the green infrastructure sector. Marcus's minority equity stake, valued at $90,000 in the divorce settlement 14 months earlier, converted at acquisition price to approximately $4.3 million. He received the wire transfer on a Thursday morning. He sat at his desk above the dry cleaning shop with the smell of cleaning solvent faintly present in the air and the sound of Grace Kim on the phone with a client in the next room, and he looked at his bank balance for a moment. Then he went to get coffee. He had drawings to review. He did not post about it. He did not call anyone. He did not send a message to any person who had restructured their loyalty in the preceding 14 months. He simply transferred a portion of the funds into the firm's operating account, paid his team's salaries 3 months in advance as a show of stability, retained the rest in a carefully constructed investment structure, and continued going to work. The news broke 6 weeks later. The acquisition of Viridian Systems was one of those stories that business journalists love. A small technology company born from an engineering experiment, acquired for a number that nobody had predicted. As part of the acquisition coverage, a feature piece was commissioned by a national business publication about the early believers who had seen the potential in Viridian before anyone else. Marcus was the most interesting name on the list. A structural engineer, not a venture capitalist, not a tech investor, who had taken an equity stake in lieu of consulting fees and held it patiently for 5 years while his life rearranged itself around him. The journalist who wrote the piece was thorough. She found the founding story of Ellison Pace and the departure and the establishment of Ellison Structural Group and framed it all as a narrative about quiet conviction in the face of professional and personal setback. The piece ran with a photograph of Marcus standing in front of a building his new firm had structurally assessed, arms crossed, expression calm, the building solid and unremarkable behind him. It was not a flattering photograph in the conventional sense. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had done the work, carried the weight, and was still standing. The headline read, "The Engineer Who Bet on Himself and Won $4 million." The article was shared widely in the professional engineering community. It was picked up by several national news aggregators. A morning financial news program ran a segment on it, and on the morning the article published, Marcus's phone, which Elena Reyes Ellison had blocked 14 months earlier, received 58 missed calls. Not from her personal mobile number, which he had saved under her name and would have recognized, from a series of different numbers, different phones, different borrowed devices, but the area codes were all local. He recognized the pattern immediately because he had known her for 11 years, and the pattern of her was embedded in him whether he wanted it to be or not. 58 calls on a Thursday from a woman who had blocked him. He did not answer any of them. He was in a site meeting for most of the morning and silenced his phone as a matter of professional habit. When he came out of the meeting and looked at his call log, the volume of it registered with the calm, analytical portion of his mind before the human portion fully caught up. He counted them. He sat in his car in the site parking lot and counted all 58, and then he put the phone face down on the passenger seat and sat quietly for approximately 90 seconds looking at the windshield. Then he called his attorney. Because Marcus Ellison was a structural engineer, and structural engineers understand that when a force you thought was safely contained begins exerting pressure again, you do not simply ignore it. You assess it. You determine the load. You design the appropriate response. His attorney was a woman named Carla Oduya, who had not represented him during the divorce. He had retained her 3 months into the Ellison Structural Group's formation for the firm's general legal needs, and who responded to his account of the 58 calls with a silence that Marcus had come to recognize as the particular silence of a careful person thinking carefully. "Document everything," she said. "Don't respond to any contact yet, and tell me exactly what the divorce agreement says about the Viridian stake." What the divorce agreement said about the Viridian stake was, functionally, nothing. It had been declared valued at $90,000 at the time of filing, included in the asset list, and accepted without contest by Elena's attorneys because $90,000 in a speculative equity position in an unknown technology company was not worth the legal hours required to argue over it when there were company shares and a house and a brokerage account to focus on. The settlement was signed, sealed, and final. Elena's 40% of Ellison Pace had been formally transferred. The case was closed. There was no legal mechanism by which a subsequent appreciation in a properly disclosed, properly valued asset could be reclaimed. Carla Oduya confirmed this in the specific measured way of an attorney who wants her client to understand something beyond any shadow of ambiguity. "She has no claim," Carla said. "The asset was disclosed. The valuation was accurate and defensible at the time. The settlement is final. Whatever she's calling about, it is not a legal threat. It's something else." What it was, as Marcus would understand over the following days, was something significantly messier and more human than a legal threat. It began, as these things often do, indirectly. A message appeared in his LinkedIn inbox, not from Elena, but from David Pace, his co-founder, The man who had sent the dismissive email with the period. The man who had restructured the management committee in Marcus's absence. The message was brief and struck a tone that Marcus could only describe as careful. The tone of someone who has done a calculation and decided that a certain bridge, previously burned, needs to be rebuilt, and has sat down to plan the engineering of the rebuilding. David said he had seen the article, said it was well-deserved, said they should talk. Marcus did not respond that day, or the next. He let the message sit, unread in the technical sense, but fully absorbed in the human sense, and he thought about the 11 years of the marriage, and the 9 months of the divorce proceedings, and the cardboard box in the parking lot, and the period at the end of the good luck text. And he decided that the appropriate response to David's message could wait a little longer. On the 4th day, after the article ran, a woman knocked on the door of the Ellison Structural Group's office above the dry cleaning shop. Patricia, at the front desk, assessed this woman with the particular thoroughness that comes from 62 years of accurate human reading. She came to the door of Marcus's office and said, without particular inflection, "There is a woman here who says she's your ex-wife." Then Patricia returned to her desk, because Patricia's job was to inform, not to intervene. Marcus came to the office doorway. Elena was standing in the small reception area in a coat he recognized, charcoal wool, good quality, the one she had bought the winter before. Things had become clearly unsalvageable. She looked, he thought, slightly less certain than he had ever seen her look, which was not nothing, because in 11 years he had almost never seen Elena Reyes Ellison look uncertain about anything. She had always moved through the world with the composed confidence of someone who knew the value of what she was bringing to every situation. "Marcus," she said. "Elena," he said. She glanced at Patricia, who was doing paperwork with the focused attention of someone who is absolutely not listening to anything happening 6 feet away. "Could we speak privately?" Elena asked. Marcus considered the small office behind him, the drawings on the desk, the structural calculations for a bridge assessment that were due by end of week, the 58 calls on his phone. He looked at Elena for a moment, the specific, measured look he had developed over 11 years of professional engineering practice. The look that assessed a structure for what it actually was rather than what it presented itself as. "We can use the conference room," he said. The conference room was a table and 4 chairs in a converted storage space. Marcus was entirely comfortable with this. He sat. She sat. The building made the small sounds of buildings. In winter, expansion and contraction, the physics of temperature, entirely indifferent to the human drama in progress below. Elena spoke first, and she did something that Marcus had not anticipated. She dispensed with preamble. Perhaps she had rehearsed this. Perhaps she had decided that circling the subject would be counterproductive with a man who built things for a living and had limited patience for structures that didn't bear any load. She said, too, "I saw the article. I know about Viridian. I want you to know I am not here to make any legal claim. Carla Oduya's name is on your firm's website, and I know what she would have told you." Marcus said nothing. He was curious what the next sentence would be. "I'm here," Elena said, and stopped, and started again. "I've been thinking about the past 2 years, about what was done, about how things happened." She looked at the table for a moment, then looked up, and Marcus had the uncomfortable sensation of seeing something real behind her eyes. Not performance, not the managed presentation he had associated with the last phase of their marriage, but something unmediated and raw. "Richard and I ended 3 months ago," she said. "He went back to his wife. He'd been going back and forth it doesn't matter. I just want you to know." "I'm sorry to hear that," Marcus said. And he meant it, which surprised him slightly. Elena looked at him. "Are you? I don't take pleasure in people being hurt," he said. "Not even people who hurt me." He said it without accusation, simply as information, as a structural fact about himself that he was offering for her consideration. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing he suspected she had come to say, the load-bearing sentence that the entire visit was designed around. "I made a calculation," she said, "about you. About us. About what you were worth, what the company was worth, what the future would look like. I was wrong." Marcus considered this. He thought about the word calculation, which was interesting because he lived his life in calculations, because he trusted mathematics in the way that some people trusted God, because he understood that calculations are only as good as the inputs you feed them. And what Elena had fed her calculation about him were the wrong inputs. She had measured his worth by his approximate position on a particular Tuesday in a particular year, rather than by his actual structural capacity, by what he was genuinely built to carry. "I know," he said. "I want to know if there's—" She started. "Elena." He said her name quietly, and she stopped. "What is it you're asking me? Say the actual thing." She met his eyes. "I want to know if there's any way back." The room was very still. Outside, a bus went past. On the street below, Patricia turned a page. The building breathed. Marcus thought about several things in rapid sequence with the compressed efficiency of a mind accustomed to structural analysis. He thought about 11 years. He thought about what he had contributed and what had been taken. He thought about the person he had been at 41, standing in a parking lot with a chipped coffee mug, and the person he was now, 14 months later, sitting in a conference room above a dry cleaning shop with 8 active contracts and a team he was proud of, and $4.3 million in an investment account, and, more importantly, a specific and hard-won clarity about what he was capable of and what he was worth that he had not possessed before. He had not arrived at that clarity easily. He had paid for it with some of the most difficult months of his life. He thought about all of this in approximately 8 seconds. Then he said, "No." Elena absorbed this. She nodded once, slowly, which he respected. She did not argue. She did not escalate. She absorbed the load of the answer and held it. "You blocked my number," Marcus said, not harshly, but as an accounting of fact, after 11 years. "You blocked my number the day after the settlement was signed. And I want you to understand that I'm not saying this to punish you. I'm saying it because it told me something I needed to know about what I had actually been to you at the end. Not a person, a position that was no longer required." Elena's jaw tightened slightly, and he saw her absorb that too. "That's fair," she said quietly. "I know," he said again. He stood. "I hope things get better for you, Elena, genuinely. I have no anger left. I think I used all of it in about the first 3 weeks." He paused. "But there's no way back. Because there's nothing to go back to. I'm not the person I was when you left. And this," he gestured almost imperceptibly, encompassing the office and the work on his desk, and the drawings and the sound of Grace Kim's voice on the phone in the next room. "None of this existed when you were there. This is new. You don't have a claim on it. You don't have history here." She stood as well. They looked at each other across the small table in the converted storage room, and Marcus thought that in another life, not a better life, but a different one, they might have found a way to be something to each other. That version of events simply was not the version that had happened. "Thank you for coming," he said, and extended his hand. Elena Reyes Ellison looked at his hand for a moment. Then she shook it, briefly, and walked out through the reception area past Patricia, who was still doing paperwork with great concentration, and down the stairs to the street. Marcus returned to his office. He sat at his desk. He picked up the bridge assessment drawings and found the place he had left off. David Pace's LinkedIn message remained unanswered for another 2 weeks, at which point Marcus replied with a message of 3 sentences. He acknowledged the communication. He noted that he wished David and Ellison Pace continued success. He closed by observing that he had no interest in resuming any formal relationship with the company, and that he trusted David would understand. He used no period of particular emotional significance at the end. David wrote back a longer message that began with an apology and contained several paragraphs about the difficulty of the position he had been in during the divorce proceedings and about the ways in which the restructuring of the management committee had been a business necessity rather than a betrayal of their friendship, and about the article, and about how he had always known Marcus was exceptional. Marcus read it. He found the apology technically complete, but structurally inadequate. The kind of apology that absolves the apologizer more than it serves the person being apologized to. He did not respond to this second message. He did not block David Pace. He simply allowed the conversation to arrive at its natural end, the way a load path arrives at its foundation. The energy distributed the structure at rest. In the months that followed the article, Ellison's structural group expanded. The national coverage brought inquiries from clients in 2 other cities. Marcus hired a 4th engineer, a woman named Josephine Park, who had 12 years of experience and a reputation in her field that was, if anything, more formidable than Marcus's own. He opened a second office in a proper building with proper ceilings and no dry cleaning smell, and moved Patricia into an office of her own, because she had earned it and because she ran the firm's administration with a precision that Marcus deeply respected and intended to compensate accordingly. He offered his founding team equity stakes in the firm because he was constitutionally incapable of building something with people and not believing they should have a share in what they had built. The Viridian investment was placed in a structure that Carla Oduya helped him design, a mix of a charitable foundation in his parents' names and a reinvestment vehicle focused on exactly the kind of engineering and technology initiatives that had made Viridian interesting to him in the first place. He did not become a venture capitalist. He remained, to his core, an engineer. But he understood now that investment and creation were not separate categories. They were the same impulse operating at different scales. He ran, he slept, he ate regularly. He did not, for a period that stretched nearly a year past the parking lot and the cardboard box, pursue any romantic relationship, because he had learned, with great specificity, what it cost to invest in a structure without properly understanding its load-bearing capacity, and he found that he was content, for now, to let that particular part of his life remain under assessment. What he discovered, in those months of building and running and calculating and doing the work, was something that sounds obvious stated plainly, but that many people spend entire lifetimes failing to internalize. That the most reliable measure of a person's worth is what they construct in the time when nobody is watching. When there is no audience, no approval to seek, no position to defend. When it is only the work and the person doing it, and the question of whether the structure will hold. Marcus had done his best work in the parking lot, in the apartment, in the office above the dry cleaning shop. In the months when Elena was at restaurants with Richard Colton and David Pace was restructuring committees, and the mutual friends had realigned, and Marcus was, to all external appearances, a man who had been accurately assessed and found wanting. He had done his best work in that invisibility, and it had produced something that none of the people who had dismissed him were positioned to take credit for, because they had not believed in it when belief was the only currency available. He thought about this sometimes on his morning runs, not with bitterness, but with the particular satisfaction of a person who has tested a hypothesis under controlled conditions and found it confirmed. The hypothesis was this: that dignity is not something that can be taken from you by another person's judgment. It is something you either maintain or abandon by your own choice, in your own conduct, in the small daily decisions about what you are willing to do and what you are not. Every morning in that parking lot, every morning in the small apartment, every quiet workday above the dry cleaning shop, Marcus had chosen, without drama or declaration, to maintain his Elena's number remained in his phone. He did not call it, he did not block it, he left it there, as neither an open wound nor a closed door, but simply as information, as data pertaining to a structure he had once helped to build, and that no longer required his involvement. On certain mornings, when the run was good and the air had that particular quality of early spring cold, he thought about the 11 years with a kind of neutral archaeological curiosity, turning the artifacts over in his mind the way you examine something you've excavated and cataloged and are ready to place carefully on the shelf. He was 43 years old. He had built something real from the wreckage of something else. He had done it without cruelty and without compromise, and without losing the particular quality of himself that had always been the most load-bearing element of his character, the quiet, precise, patient conviction that good work, done honestly, with integrity as the foundation and excellence as the standard, would eventually produce a structure that could not be dismissed. He had been right about that. He had always been right about that. The article on his phone was merely evidence. The last remarkable thing that happened in Marcus Ellison's 14th month was small and private, and nobody covered it in any publication. He was in the office on a Friday afternoon when Josephine Park appeared in his doorway and said that a potential client had called. Mid-sized development company looking for a structural assessment on a complex project, a renovation of a historic building with significant challenges, the kind of work that would require creativity as much as calculation. She named the development company. Marcus looked up from his drawings. The development company's managing partner listed on their website was Richard Colton. Marcus and Josephine looked at each other across the office for a moment. "Do we want it?" Josephine asked, in the tone of a person who was genuinely asking rather than assuming. Marcus thought about it with the honest, unpretentious directness that had become the governing quality of his professional life since the divorce. He thought about Richard Colton and Elena, and the settlement, and the managed exit, and the block number, and the 58 calls, and the conference room, and Elena's expression when he had said there was no way back. He thought about all of it. Then he thought about the building, the historic structure, with its complex renovation challenges, the real engineering problem that existed entirely independently of the human drama surrounding it. "Get me the project specs," he said, because Marcus Ellison was a structural engineer, and a difficult, interesting building problem was a difficult, interesting building problem. And in the end, the work was the work. Honest and demanding and indifferent to the feelings of everyone involved, and he had decided 14 months ago in a parking lot with a chipped coffee mug that the work was enough, that it had always been enough, that he was enough. He had simply been the last to know it, and now he did. I want to sit with you in what this story is actually about for a moment before we close, because I think it deserves that. This is not a story about money, though the money is real in it. It is not a story about revenge, though the symmetry is undeniable. It is a story about what happens when you stop performing your worth for people who have already decided they know what you are, and instead simply demonstrate it, quietly, consistently, over time, in the work that only you can see. Marcus did not plot his vindication. He did not scheme or maneuver or plan his moment. He went to work. He was honest. He maintained his integrity, even when doing so cost him significantly. And the world, which had looked at him and seen a man who had lost, eventually looked again and saw something it had missed entirely. There is something in that worth sitting with, wherever you are tonight. If you are watching from a place of difficulty, from your own parking lot moment, your own chipped mug, I hope this story reaches you as it was meant to reach you, not as fantasy, but as evidence. The structural integrity was there before the article. It was there in the apartment. It was there in the building, above the dry cleaning shop. The world just needed to catch up with what the work had already proven. If this story moved you, if it said something you needed to hear, please hit the like button. It helps more people find their way here, people who might need it. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because we tell stories like this every week, and there are more coming that I think you'll want to hear. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what does this story bring up for you? I read every comment. I mean that. Until next time, keep building.